Hi, and welcome back to State of New Zealand. Let's talk about the worse than usual integrity from our politicians that we've seen over the last week. Firstly, we had Deborah Russell blaming small business owners for failing during lockdown, which she had to apologise for after it caused a bit of a backlash. It seems that on News Talk ZB, Deborah was apologetic, but we are all too familiar with fake apologies, especially from politicians. So how genuine was it? You probably don't know, well, you do know the answer, but let's dive into it anyway. So in her apology, she said that the fault doesn't lie with the businesses, it's clearly COVID-19's fault. Now, there's no doubt we are in this situation because the virus exists, but it does seem that Deborah is all about laying the blame on the virus and refusing to consider that the government's handling of the situation has contributed to more businesses failing than it otherwise could have. We haven't seen the worst of it yet, but it's obvious that the extreme lockdown hurt small businesses more than it had to. Instead of recognising that the government should be doing everything that it can to reduce the impact on those small businesses without majorly increasing the risks, she just blames the virus and leaves it at that. So she goes on to admit that she did put the blame on small businesses and their owners, but she says she didn't want to hurt anyone. You know what? Let's pull up that clip and just have a look at the smirk that she had on.
In a pretty bad situation, which must speak to the strength of those small businesses.
It's definitely there. This sort of smart-ass smirk that you get from feeling vindicated, as if she'd just one-upped those greedy business owners by pointing out that they are failing due to their own incompetence. This is not the body language of someone who is concerned about businesses failing. This is the body language of someone who is, well, giving a smart-ass "I told you so" to their opposition, which suggests to us that she considers business owners her opposition. Next, she said, "Lots of people felt that I was blaming them, and I'm really sorry I made them feel that way." That tells us she stands by what she said, she just wasn't tactful enough in how she said it. This is reinforced when she goes on to say that once we're out at the other side of this crisis, we need to have a really good think about how we make our businesses more resilient. So there you go. After insulting small businesses across the country, she doubles down on the same message, just in a less harsh way. A fake apology, and, well, clearly nothing learned about the realities of what is happening to small businesses as a result of lockdown. After the pandemic is dealt with, Deborah will have learned nothing, and she's actually maybe even signalling we'll see some ideological pressure on businesses coming out the other side of this. So even if the businesses can survive the economic onslaught, they might have to survive an ideological one that will come afterwards if people like Deborah have anything to say about it. This is definitely not the kind of messaging that politicians should be sending with so much uncertainty and pain amongst small businesses right now. David Clark is next on the list. You might remember him from such films as "I'm taking my family to the beach during lockdown" and "Mountain biking is no longer for peasants," because, well, we've now seen a third installment where he has moved houses during lockdown, and another demonstration of why he's not trustworthy enough for that job that he is supposedly doing. When the Prime Minister was asked about it, we got a bit of a fluffed response, nonsense answer, and, well, she simply avoided the topic of firing him for his continued breaches. We've seen a number of Kiwis arrested for breaching lockdown for various things, and while most haven't had charges laid, having a minister seem to be getting away with the same thing as people might be getting arrested for, that's a really poor look, and it highlights some pretty obvious hypocrisy, perhaps bordering on disdain, for the everyday Kiwis that are paying their salaries. The next thing involving the Prime Minister is, well, remember how she made that promise for ministers to take a 20% pay cut while the rest of us are struggling? Yeah, that. Well, it never happened. And in the first session of Parliament, ACT MP David Seymour tried to introduce a bill to make that 20% cut a reality. The government quickly vetoed it. Well, in true political style, because they have already banked the political capital from making that promise. So now it can be safely ignored without taking the actual pay cut. Such a blatantly obvious display of bad faith without any kind of being held to account is continuing to push New Zealand in the wrong direction. Further on the Prime Minister, there is, well, a disturbing claim about interference in the media. So by now you should know about the $50 million bailout for the media companies. And well, it's important not to single that industry out for bailouts because a lot of industries are stalled and will need bailouts. But we do need to ask if there were any strings attached because, well, it looks as though Stuff has made changes to an article at the behest of the Prime Minister's office. It appears as though what's happened is an article that's a little critical of the Prime Minister's handling by Steve Ellers from Massey University didn't go down so well, and a call was made to Stuff from the Prime Minister's office saying that they were disappointed, and suddenly the article has been changed. In this case, it was a clarification added to the article, but it sets a crazy, dangerous precedent where articles can be changed by political interference. For anyone who's concerned about the state's hand in media, especially with this bailout, this is a huge red flag. Some might argue that maybe it's just a clarification, but it represents a dangerous step in the wrong direction of political interference in the media. Sure, the main news outlets are already fairly biased towards certain ideologies, but until now, that was just the alignment of the activists with those political ideologies. If the Prime Minister's office did make that call, then a line has been crossed and no Kiwi should be standing for that. And one last thing to talk about is how someone from the government at the start of lockdown, we just heard about it recently, we don't know who it was, but they suggested suspending the Official Information Act during lockdown. The Official Information Act allows us to request information from the government agencies so that we, as citizens, know they're not being dodgy or corrupt or doing unlawful things. And it's an important tool in keeping New Zealand as a proper democratic nation. So at a time when we were being restricted to our homes, at least some within the government wanted to be able to act without us keeping them in check. It might be logical to argue that maybe the government agencies simply didn't have the manpower to answer those requests during the lockdown, and this would just be a way to alleviate that. But the logical answer to that would be to expand the timeframes for responses rather than to remove the transparency completely, especially at a time when the risk of abusing all these newfound powers makes it more important than ever. We've seen some pretty poor behaviour in general and an enhanced lack of integrity towards this end of level 4 lockdown. Hopefully it's just a temporary thing with the stress of the situation getting to them rather than the start of a new normal.